The United States Army War College student team, Axis Insight 2035, prepared this brief as an integrated research project to complete the strategic research requirement portion of the Master of Strategic Studies degree program. This report answers the questions posted by Mr. Ian Sullivan, Deputy Chief of Staff, G2, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command. Team Axis analyzed 876 estimates from open course information across multiple industries and think tanks. The team consisted of Colonel Byron Cadiz, Aviation, Colonel Marc Skinner, Medical Specialist, Lieutenant Colonel Perkins, Aviation, Lieutenant Colonel Shun Yu, Logistics, and Lieutenant Colonel Rob Mayhue, Judge Advocate. Additionally, the project was advised by Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Rasmussen and Professor Chris Wheaton. The analytic confidence for our response is moderate. The question posed was complex, and the timeline to produce an answer was relatively short due to competing requirements of the U.S. Army War College core curriculum. Our source availability was high, while source reliability and corroboration were low to high, depending on the specific topic. The analysts were not subject matter experts, and some topics required extensive knowledge to fully understand. The analysts worked independently and collaboratively to answer the question. They utilized a combination of structured analytic techniques, including nominal group technique and network analysis. During this research, the analysts used AI to locate resources and create graphics. Throughout this brief and contained in the products you receive, we used Kesselman's words of estimated probability to describe the likelihood of use for specific deterrence methods. In addressing our questions, we defined deterrence efforts as strategies or actions executed by a state or an alliance designed to cause an adversary to refrain from undesired behavior or actions through the credible threat of punishment or denial. By way of background, these were our questions. How are China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea likely to respond to U.S.-led deterrence efforts through 2035? We also had two sub-questions. 1. To what extent are our adversaries likely to collude in response to U.S.-led deterrence activities? And 2. What specific adversary responses will likely affect the joint force with specific relevance to the U.S. Army's readiness and operational requirements? Our bottom line up front is, by 2035, it is almost certain that China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea will respond to U.S. deterrence with entanglement, disruptive technology, and persistent coercion. The global landscape is rapidly transforming, characterized by increasing complexity and challenges to U.S. influence. This seismic shift is marked by our key findings encompassed in 3 threat vectors. 1. An entangled future of situational cooperation and transactional interdependence among China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea amplify deterrence challenges. 2. Disruptive technology by which the U.S. advantages severely threatened ebb or are lost to adversarial emerging technologies. And 3. Persistent coercion consisting of the expansion and exploitation of gray zone tactics in which aggression below the level of armed conflict bypasses conventional deterrence. These developments collectively forecast that conventional U.S. deterrence will likely become strategically irrelevant without integrated, adaptive responses across all instruments of power. You will notice as we go through the presentation that all roads go through China in some way. China is no longer the pacing challenge, but the true threat. Threat vector number 1. Entangled future. Despite shared opposition to U.S.-led global order, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are highly unlikely, 16 to 30%, to formalize an alliance by 2035 due to long-standing historical animosities and conflicting geopolitical priorities. Instead, the relationships among these actors will almost certainly, 86 to 99%, continue to intensify and entwine, presenting significant challenges to established global norms and the influence of the United States. As we found in Foreign Affairs magazine, characterized as situational, opportunistic, and largely bilateral, their partnerships are highly likely, 71 to 85%, to become more complex as they become entangled through economic realignments, supply chain dependencies, and technological cooperation, even as each actor prioritizes its national interests. As their relationships deepen, the resulting increase in strategic and tactical coordination among these nations will likely create chaos across multiple domains, reducing the effectiveness of traditional U.S. deterrence measures. To note, current U.S. deterrence approaches rely on military alliances and partnerships like NATO, AUKUS and the Quad, forward presence, technology export controls, and economic sanctions. The collective effect of revisionist states' asymmetric tactics, amplified by China's institutional and economic leverage, threatens to normalize illiberal practices while eroding the credibility of U.S.-backed enforcement mechanisms. This convergence poses a distributed, persistent threat to U.S. influence, marked by institutional fragmentation, economic decoupling, and strategic alteration of the existing international order. As the economic powerhouse of the quartet, China's approach to reshaping the international order is highly likely to favor entangled interdependence, leveraging economic, technological, and institutional dependencies to exert influence without direct confrontation. The Belt and Road Initiative, including the Digital Silk Road per the Center for International Governance Innovation, serves as a key mechanism for expanding Chinese influence through physical and digital infrastructure, energy grids, and financial systems. China's dominance in critical supply chains, including rare earth minerals, pharmaceuticals, and semiconductors, and its growing influence in international standard-setting bodies will likely, 56 to 70%, enable it to apply subtle yet firm pressure on states dependent on its technologies and markets to achieve Chinese interests. China's strategy does not operate in isolation. It is increasingly intertwined with the actions of Russia, Iran, and North Korea. These relationships, driven by necessity rather than shared ideology, are expected to harmonize as a direct response to U.S.-led deterrence and containment efforts. By 2035, these will almost certainly evolve into more integrated multi-domain operations with enhanced AI, space, and cyber capabilities with a sharp focus on technological denial regimes. For its benefit, China supports Russia in exchange for long-term guaranteed access to oil and gas resources to support its industrial base while undergoing conversions to clean energy. Similarly, China uses Iran for access to oil and gas at preferential prices while diversifying energy suppliers to reduce vulnerability. North Korea benefits China by acting as a geographic buffer between China and U.S.-allied South Korea, preventing U.S. military presence along the Chinese border. Russia, heavily sanctioned and seeking to undermine U.S. influence, is likely to continue its assertive behavior in Europe, although directly seeking war with NATO will remain unlikely. Russia's development of advanced military technologies aims to erode U.S. military superiority, while its financial decoupling from the dollar through the expansion of system for transfer of financial messages and integration with China's cross-border interbank payment systems will likely diminish the effectiveness of U.S.-led economic sanctions. China serves as Russia's economic lifeline, providing industrial goods, consumer products, and dual-use technology while under Western sanctions. Russia uses Iran for regional power projection into the Middle East to counter U.S. influence, facilitating military cooperation in exchange for potential basing options. The United States Institute of Peace agrees that Russia and North Korea's blooming relationship and their exchange of military materiel and personnel underscore a growing alignment against the West. Iran, motivated by regime survival, is highly likely to continue its aggressive development of drone warfare capabilities and conduct cyber attacks against critical U.S. infrastructure. Its willingness to export drone technology, even to sanction Russia, highlights its pursuit of indirect conflict as a means of projecting power. Iran's increasing reliance on China's economic support through oil exports and market access amid sanctions is highly likely to grant Beijing significant leverage over Tehran's foreign policy decisions. In exchange for regional access, Iran benefits from Russia's military technology, including advanced air defense systems, combat aircraft, and naval vessels, as well as technical assistance for civilian nuclear facilities as a diplomatic cover for possible nuclear weapons development. Though geographically separated, Iran will foster deepened relations with North Korea to benefit from their ballistic missile technology and expertise, particularly as it applies to their nuclear program and possible technology transfers. North Korea, despite its limited capabilities, is highly likely to provocatively leverage its military capacity to ensure regime survival. To prevent uncontrolled escalation and destabilization in the region, China will almost certainly continue to serve as a critical trade partner to North Korea, ensuring its economic solvency. Russia will likely repay North Korea's troop and munitions support through transfers of sophisticated weapons technologies for its nuclear, missile, and submarine programs, to include training and technical assistance for further weapons development. The deepening Russia-North Korea relationship will likely weaken the UN Security Council's enforcement mechanisms, further undermining global non-proliferation norms. Per the Congressional Research Service report, in exchange for its assistance with Iran's missile and nuclear program, North Korea is highly likely to seek support in drone technology and production techniques. Collectively, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, through their entanglement, will generate compounding pressure across multiple domains, challenging the U.S.-led international order through disruptive technology and persistent coercion. The prospect of a major international conflict, especially over Taiwan, is present and is evident from both China's deeds and rhetoric. Whether the country chooses to use force depends on Xi's reading of external resistance, U.S. alliances, and the belief that time and technological accumulation favor its long-term military position. Threat vector number 2, disruptive technology, adversary breakthroughs undermine U.S. dominance. China is driving the development and integration of nearly all disruptive technologies, which include quantum warfare, drone swarm, hypersonic missiles, and metamaterial stealth, with Russia advancing primarily in hypersonic weapons. North Korea and Iran remain marginal players, contributing little to innovation but potentially exploiting regional instability enabled by Chinese and Russian breakthroughs. By 2035, China and Russia will almost certainly leverage integrated disruptive technologies to launch rapid theater-specific campaigns that compress U.S. and allied response timelines and challenge deterrence credibility. China will likely attempt to seize Taiwan under the cover of quantum-enabled command and control C2 and multi-domain disruption. Russia will likely target NATO's eastern flank through precision coercion and short-notice escalation. Iran and North Korea will likely opportunistically escalate in their regions at limited scale, aiming to test U.S. bandwidth during simultaneous crises. These technologies degrade U.S. and allied advantages in sensing, speed, and decision-making. Forward-deployed assets face growing vulnerability to first-strike operations. ISR blind spots expand across critical theaters. Adversaries create decision paralysis in the opening phases of conflict. Their integrated use of disruptive systems bypasses deterrence by punishment and neutralizes deterrence by denial. Quantum warfare. PLA disrupts US ISR and secures command. China will almost certainly exploit quantum breakthroughs to undermine Allied decision superiority by 2035. The National Quantum Coordination Office revealed the PLA has already operationalized the MISHA's quantum satellite and invested over $15.3 billion in national quantum research and development, enabling secure, cyber-resistant internal networks and quantum key distribution. Per the U.S. National Institute of Standard and Technology, the PLA is almost certain to use these tools to compromise classical encryption, intercept ISR feeds, and fragment alliance coordination through denial and deception, as early warning networks degrade, USC2 slows, and reliability drops. During a strategically distracting moment, such as a domestic crisis or simultaneous escalation, as reported in the South China Morning Post, China will highly likely exploit its quantum advantage to disable Allied communications at the outset of a cross-strait conflict. By blinding ISR systems and degrading early warning, the Mercator Institute for Chinese Studies found that China is highly likely to fragment Allied coordination and execute rapid offensive operations in the Indo-Pacific, especially around Taiwan. By masking the source of disruptions and exploiting ambiguity, the PLA will likely operate below deterrence thresholds, achieving objectives without triggering a unified U.S. response. Swarm supremacy. Drone mass redefines tactical dominance. By 2035, China is likely to dominate carrier-based and coastal airspace using AI-enabled drone swarms launched from Type 076 amphibious ships and other swarm-capable platforms. The Department of the Air Force's China Aerospace Studies Institute at the Air University has reported these swarms, exceeding 100 drones per sortie, can execute saturation attacks and deploy electronic warfare payloads to neutralize U.S. high-value assets like the F-35C and E-2D. Coordinated via AI and Beidou satellite networks, these swarms are likely to subject U.S. naval forces operating near Taiwan or the South China Sea to constant unmanned precision strikes. Per the Center for Naval Analyses, U.S. deterrence by denial, once anchored in forward carrier strike groups, will likely lose credibility. China will likely use drone swarms to establish exclusion zones, overwhelm early warning systems, and deny U.S. access to contested areas, asserting control before escalation reaches a threshold for major response. Hypersonic strike. Speed paralyzes NATO and Indo-Pacific forces. China and Russia are almost certain to integrate hypersonic weapons into preemptive strike options by 2035. As reported by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, PLA platforms like the DFZF and JF-22 alongside Russian systems like the Avangard and Zircon travel at speeds exceeding Mach 5 and follow evasive trajectories that defeat existing missile defenses. These systems place critical infrastructure, airfields, and C2 nodes at risk within 6 minutes of launch. U.S. bases in Guam, Okinawa, and Eastern Europe are likely to become indefensible. According to the Atlantic Council, both China and Russia will likely use hypersonics to delay or disable Allied responses before they can mobilize. This compresses decision timelines below actionable thresholds, erodes extended deterrence credibility, and increases the likelihood of adversaries securing rapid gains in the initial phase of conflict. Stealth at scale. Metamaterials erase early warning. By 2035, China will likely field advanced metamaterial platforms that evade detection across radar, thermal, and acoustic spectrums. According to Science Direct, field-tested and patented technologies already demonstrate up to 50% radar cross-section reduction while increasing survivability and reducing platform weight. China is highly likely to deploy stealth fighters, drones, and hypersonic systems across the Western Pacific without triggering ISR alarms. This eliminates key indicators that U.S. planners use to anticipate offensive operations. With warning time removed, China will reposition missile units, stage amphibious forces, and maneuver unmanned assets under ISR blackout. The United States Naval Institute reports Beijing will assess that metamaterials provide the concealment needed to neutralize pre-crisis detection frameworks, delay Allied response, and seize initiative, effectively undermining deterrence before open conflict begins. Threat vector number 3, persistent coercion activities below the threshold of conflict. By 2035, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea are highly likely, 71 to 85%, to intensify their strategic use of persistent coercion tactics to expand geopolitical influence and undermine U.S. and allied interests globally to create time and space in order to pursue their national interests. Examples of persistent coercion tactics include lawfare, international peacekeeping missions, digital Silk Road, DSR initiatives, and attacks to critical infrastructure. These tactics span the competition continuum below the level of armed conflict, with those closer to the conflict end of the spectrum as potential indicators for future conflict. Persistent coercion challenges U.S. strategic posture and alliance cohesion. Expansion of persistent coercion operations. China is rapidly enhancing its capabilities within the gray zone. This activity is increasingly prominent in sensitive areas such as the Arctic, as highlighted by the Wilson Center, where critical U.S. infrastructure, including undersea communications cables, remains vulnerable. Employing military-civil fusion strategies, China uses commercial maritime assets and infrastructure projects as covert sabotage platforms, exploiting plausible deniability and complicating attribution. By subtly disrupting critical networks, China imposes asymmetric costs and tests Western response thresholds, identifying vulnerabilities without provoking direct military retaliation. Employment of lawfare and information dominance. The Cornell Law Review supports our finding that China will highly likely leverage lawfare through the weaponized use of international law in order to legitimize geopolitical claims and reshape global norms, often in coordination with Russia. Promoting alternative interpretations of sovereignty and territorial rights, notably regarding the South China Sea and Taiwan, China neutralizes Western diplomatic efforts. Concurrently, sophisticated disinformation campaigns via mainstream and social media undermine U.S. and allied credibility, positioning China as a responsible international actor. These narrative controls effectively erode Western diplomatic influence, gradually shifting international perceptions and norms in China's favor, particularly in the absence of a cohesive U.S.-led counter-lawfare response. Strategic deployment of peacekeeping operations. China will highly likely utilize United Nations peacekeeping operations to expand its military and diplomatic influence worldwide. These missions align with China's broader Belt and Road Initiative, safeguarding economic interests and embedding Chinese military forces globally under the mantle of international legitimacy. Peacekeeping deployments facilitate logistical and capability development beyond traditional Chinese influence zones, and the Royal United Services Institute has found diminishing U.S. soft power and diplomatic leverage, particularly in Africa and Southeast Asia. This visible presence enhances China's global reputation as a responsible stakeholder, creating opportunities for increased political influence and economic integration, thereby challenging U.S. global leadership and strategic interests. Pivot from BRI to Digital Silk Road (DSR). Due to demographic pressures such as an aging population and shrinking workforce, China will likely shift focus from large-scale global infrastructure projects under the BRI to regional digital infrastructure development via the DSR, prioritizing investments in 5G networks, artificial intelligence, and green energy predominantly in Southeast and Central Asia. As per a recent article in the East Asia Forum, China seeks to consolidate regional influence. This shift enables China to embed its technologies deeply within partner nations' digital ecosystems, fostering technological dependencies and influencing global digital standards. By controlling technological standards and protocols, China aims to assert long-term geopolitical influence through increased participation and leadership in international standard-setting organizations. Infrastructure attacks. Supported by a recent RAND report, it is highly likely, 71 to 85%, that by 2035, China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea will attempt to leverage attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure to slow or paralyze its response capabilities prior to or during a conflict scenario. Due to the increasing development and integration of counterspace capabilities, cyber warfare tactics, and the demonstrated willingness to target critical infrastructure, Potential adversaries have the capability to hold U.S. critical infrastructure at risk. Despite the risks of escalation and international condemnation associated with such actions, the perceived strategic advantages of gaining temporal leverage by disrupting U.S. power projection and decision-making processes will likely incentivize these nations to employ such tactics. Conclusion. All roads go through China. Taken together, these findings point to a comprehensive Chinese strategy to reshape the global order by 2035 through non-kinetic, legal, technological, and persistent coercion operations. China is creating the conditions to win future conflicts before they begin, blinding, dividing, and weakening the United States and its allies through persistent low-threshold actions. While the U.S. retains conventional military dominance now, our adversaries are innovating in the seams between peace and war, seeking technological overmatch in the very near future.